John, do you miss being on this side?
Pardon?
Do you miss being on this side? It's been a long time.
You don't miss being up there, do you?
No.
I knew this.
So I will just warn you, we have the owl going for microphones, and so anybody sitting at the table, you are at study session, so it's about interacting, so speak loud and clear, so everybody can hear you.
Gotcha.
Can we start? So, welcome to the Affordable Housing Commission. This is the Hooper City Council and the Affordable Housing Commission's joint study session. It is November 6th, and it is 6 o'clock. Do you guys need to open your, does the chair need to call you guys to order to do? I don't know.
It's a study session.
Study, yeah, very informal, okay. So first item of business is, the First and Pine Circuit property. And Julian, you have a report for it? Introduction.
Yeah.
That would be fair. Sarah, are you chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you, well, introduce yourself and everyone
Sure.
else, or-
And then let everyone
And
else
let everyone
introduce
else.
themselves. Sure. Sarah Bedsall, Chair, Affordable Housing Commission. I'm pretty sure everyone in the room knows who I am. Yep. But we'll go with Dan.
Dan Wachowski, also on housing committee.
Kevin Bunston on the housing commission. Courtney Harris on the housing commission.
John Ferry.
Okay. Do you want more like background?
Yeah, do you want a little bit of background? Is that what you're kind of looking for, like just to set the stage? Take the
I mean, we did a point, but it's been a
Okay,
while
sure.
for some of you.
So, I don't know where to start. Public Health Department for many years, working for walkable, buildable communities, affordable housing, did the Community Land Trust project for a couple of years, tried to get that nonprofit up and going. Currently a real estate broker, was a home inspector for many, many years, working with buyers, looking at trying to find, first time home buyers, affordable housing. It's just been a long time passion of mine that I've worked really hard towards. So I've got a lot of years into this. I'm going to go for 10, kind of been part of the process for a long time. So that's kind of me. So.
I work at Central Washington Disability Resources, and one of the things that I kind of wanted to be on the board is, I help a lot of people with unhomed here in the community, and over the years of working in that population, it seems like there's a growing population that needs support. And so I feel there's a big, great need for these kind of projects. I'd like to be able to insight and kind of be in the ground floor, helping us kind of move forward.
Lifetime community member, yes.
Yes.
I'm also a lifetime community member, and we own KNF Orchards out towards the pocket, and I also work for Remax as a real estate agent. I'm kind of newer to this part of this. I'm just learning and growing.
I moved to Ellensburg in 2019. I came here for grad school. I have some experience in the disability field, and I work as the case manager at Comprehensive Healthcare, and I am also the housing coordinator there. So I manage about 16 units of people to make sure they get their housing, and then I also help them meet their housing needs at our facility.
I've been around so long. I've been continuously either doing something with the city or county since 1967. In 1967, I ran for the city council there. I'd never been to a city council meeting. I didn't know what they did. I did not campaign. I turned on the morning news the day after the election. I was on the city council. And I went through a learning curve and really got interested in what we're doing. I've been interested in economic development and housing. Because I don't think you can separate everything. I have had experience with a contractor. I've got a number of business experiences. I probably run into more people when they can help because I'm a retired school teacher. I just would like to see things happen in Ellensburg. Been a long time waiting.
Don was mayor when I first joined. Thank you all for coming. And we'll keep you on your toes and turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners, council members, Madam Mayor. Jeremy Johnson, Community Development Planning Manager for the record. Go ahead and share the screen here. Okay, so we have gathered here for this joint study session to look at the first and prime property specifically and the criteria we may use in order to initiate our next RFP to try to develop these properties for affordable housing. So the topics we'll discuss tonight, I want to go into a little bit of the affordable housing background, specifically a quick review of the housing action plan, some of the data in that plan, and then general information on income restricted housing levels that are currently in the city. We're going to get into specifically the First and Pine property. I'm going to talk about some of the site constraints and the history of the development proposals for the property. And then finally, we will look at some council guidance to the Affordable Housing Commission for projects on surplus property, but the First and Pine property specifically. I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly because I want to leave enough time for there to be some adequate discussion to provide some guidance. So it seems like I'm going fast, that's intentional. Okay, so the affordable housing background. On October 4th, 2021, city adopted our housing action plan. The plan includes an assessment of current needs and strategies to incentivize affordable housing projects. Some of those needs were demonstrated here in the plan, the demographic needs, specifically the levels of need for older adults 62 plus, and other category is generally single adults, largely made up of college students. Those sort of dominate these charts for both cost burden and severely cost burdened demographics. 2/3 of the households in Ellensburg are made up of 1 or 2 people. Yet almost 50% of all housing units in Ellensburg have 3 or more bedrooms. The housing action plan indicates a need for several missing middle housing types. These include townhouses, cottage style housing, 2, 3, and 4 plexes, ADUs and EADUs, so that's attached accessory dwelling units and detached, and condominiums. So currently, Ellensburg has 14 developments that are subject to income restricted housing requirements. These developments consist of 685 units. And they range in AMI threshold from 30% to 95%. However, there's a recent subsidy expiration of 2 developments totaling 224 of those units. They'll take place in 2027. And let's see here. And there's a few more that are actually scheduled 2029, I believe. There'll be another 72 unit development that the subsidy will expire. This doesn't mean necessarily that that they won't be affordable anymore, but it means the option is open to the owner of the property to make they choose or sell the property.
Just a quick question. So the 685 units, what's the total number of units available in the community? What's the percentage? Is it that 1% of the available units? Is that 10% of the available housing units?
So these are just specifically for the subsidized units. They're subsidized from various sources. So it would be out of the subsidized units that are in the city of Ellensburg, it's a total of 685 currently.
And 685 represent what percentage of the available housing stock for?
That I don't know.
Okay, sorry.
I wish I had that.
Not very much,
I didn't look at it.
Okay.
right? I mean,
10%.
It's gonna be less than 1%.
Oh,
Housing units.
That would be 59,000.
We have, we'll get out. 5,000. Yeah,
10% of 6,600, right? So.
Okay, keep going.
And as you look at that list, as you look at that list of 685 units, there's various expiration schedules on those. Like I said, I mentioned the ones that expire in 2027, another one I think in 2029, and a couple in 2033 that will be expiring as well. So let's get into specifically the previous proposal for these first compliance properties. This was originally the city received an application to install an interest to develop this property on October 13th of 2020. Obviously, this was before the housing action plan had been developed. This application was terminated following an affordable housing agreement and a conditional approval from council to move forward with development. The benchmarks were not met, and so the application was terminated, which leaves us to look for new potential affordable housing projects on this property. The original proposal was for 57 studio units. It included 3 buildings of 19 units each, with 3 ADA compliant units, and units average 375 square feet. So some of the constraints on this property, on these 2 parcels, they combine to be approximately a half acre, and they are in a central commercial zone, which doesn't technically have setbacks, but it does have streetscape requirements associated with it. So Pine Street is considered a secondary street, so there'll be about a 10-foot setback that will be required in order to meet those street improvements. On First Avenue is a landscape street, which will require a 15-foot setback to meet those landscape requirements and sidewalk requirements. So there are no density minimums or maximums. One thing I did notice on the previous proposal is I didn't see any indication that those specific setbacks had been addressed. And that's so we may want to look at that and make sure that these elements are being considered as these proposals go forward. So the current process for applying to develop these properties for affordable housing, it'll begin with a request for proposal, and staff will review the proposals that come in. The Affordable Housing Commission will then review the proposals and make a recommendation to City Council. Council will generally approve a design conditional approval. There'll be an affordable housing agreement, and then the project will be monitored for progress and agreement benchmarks within that affordable housing agreement. So one of the things that we're going to look at this evening is this process. But first, I wanted to get into specific guidance items. So before I let a sheet of paper report all you guys, that's going to go through sort of some of the things to look at with this. And I'm going to step in front of this little post-it board here and try to write to the best of my ability in a legible manner and not trip over cords. What I think we should do is probably just go through this and have a discussion on these items specifically and get some guidance. So the terms, I don't know if you heard from me often here, hopefully I can. So these are basically items that serve as a prerequisite to consideration. These are things that we want to see. We wouldn't be willing to move these proposals forward without this. So the preferences, obviously, these are things we'd like to see, but we don't necessarily require them to consider a project. So this is not an exhaustive list that I put in front of you. It's just some ideas off the top of my head of what I thought might be some things to consider. So does the proposal need to target specific criteria? I have a few examples of what those criteria can be, and maybe we can start by a discussion about specific need demographics. We want to focus on the demographics that are shown to have the most need within the city of Ellensburg in the housing action plan, or is there another purpose for this property that the council would like to see?
you know what? Those folks are subject matter experts, so I think if you guys have thoughts on this, I'm gonna give you the first chance to answer that question.
I'm a little lost in where we're at, to be honest. So what do you mean, word terms?
So basically sorry, I should explain this better. So I want to create a list that the terms being the items that we want to be in any proposal.
Longevity.
That could definitely be an item.
Is that where, am I
Absolutely.
headed in the right direction?
Yes, that's, anything I listed on here, plus anything else you guys can think of, we could consider in here, but one of those was the affordability timelines. Currently, there's a 40-year minimum for city surplus property, a 20-year,
Yeah, I think it's 50 years for the house tax portability. That's what we're using it.
Oh, I thought I read something very different. Okay, well then. Very good. Well, I guess either way, what it is, we want to stick with the minimum of whether that be 40 or 50, or do we want to, is there a preference or a term requirement that we want to have for longer affordability?
So you're starting with B.
Yeah, we can jump around in here, but since that popped up, I figured we just start.
You have a question or a comment?
Good job.
I guess this is as good a time as any to throw a bomb out. I think that we're fishing in a pond with no fish in it when we put this out. I would like to see us take a completely different approach. I would like to have the city council come up with basically what they would like to see on the first and buying property, rather than waiting for somebody, then mine to drop in. And then with that specific direction, this is what you would like to see on that property. And I would like to see us charged with seeing if we can get it done. I think that might work. If we were to take and decide what we want there, if we were to get a plan that could be pre-approved for nonprofit, public, private, whatever, and take it through the city steps so that it is ready to be permitted. All somebody would have to do is apply for a permit, and we would get on it, and we would get something done. The other alternative is to wait and see what ideas people can come up with, run it through our commission, bring it to you to see if you like it. And if you like it, then it can proceed for maybe 2 years while they see if they can get it done. And I think that's just an exercise of futility. So this is kind of a bombshell. I haven't even discussed it with the board. But I just wanted to put out what I thought would be a better approach.
I appreciate that, and so I think we have to have a discussion of how that might work and whether we have the capacity to, I mean, depending on what level of detail, I think the direction we're headed is to say, do we want it to be senior citizen housing or mixed, or there was a proposal for an arts housing. Well, there was an expressed desire, and I don't know the legality of doing that. But I think we're getting halfway to where you want to be. If we go through this process, but I'm looking to staff to try and, you know, how do we get to a proposal if we're talking a design, right? Because I mean, we can say the parameters of what we want in pretty good detail and decide on that as a group, but I'm not sure that we can get to a permitted design with the staff we have without going out for a.
Could I speak to that?
Sure.
That I have to believe that somewhere in the United States, somebody has done a similar type thing. And nonprofits, all the government agencies, everything there is about public housing. And that would involve less staff time than. And I have to believe that it's out there. We've got federal, we've got state, we have all these places that have approved plans that meet the government standards.
So, okay, so I truly believe that we should focus on the maximum amount of units. I think we should focus on according to our housing assessment, right? You've got singles and elderly, whether you combine those, don't combine those, I'm not really sure, like, whether that's tightening the reins too much. I will tell you that by putting things like 40-year affordability plans on something, you are literally only going to nonprofit. You are not catering to any private developer at that point. I think that there has to be a conversation to be had about stopgapping at certain things. I think if you want to hold to that with city property, that's fine, but I think that's, you're definitely saying that you want a nonprofit to build there with that. Like, I think you're gonna be hard pressed to find anybody else who's gonna be able to do that, manage that, handle that, pay prevailing wage, do all the things, and then do a 40-year management plan of tenants, okay? So that's okay if that's where the city's at with their property, right? So that's fine, but I think that it's important to understand that you're limiting yourself honestly to that realm. So that's a conversation, right? But I think it would be fine to say, I mean, in our housing action plans, 1, 2, 3, and 4 is we have townhouse, cottage, multiplex condos, like, can we just have a conversation about what's the best density in that area and say, listen, we're looking to maximize density. And to do that, you either have to have a condo or I don't know if it's townhouse or cottage. I'm not sure if we want to go rental or own, or I'm not sure, but I feel like that's like some basic places to start that would be broad enough that you could say, listen, in this project, on this property, this is what we want. So come to us with an application that, right?
Sure, and I think it makes sense to also, consider those constraints of the property. We're talking about a half acre. So what could conceivably be done that will provide enough density to make this, the more bang for the buck that we can get, for using what, utilizing city surplus property. So, so now that we're on that, so we got a discussion of density. I know there's a lot of different things we're jumping around here, but I want to make sure that we're moving forward and getting some. Is there general agreement on to maximize the density? Is that something that should be a primary or term consideration or a preference? I guess.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in. I think an apartment is fine, but we have to recognize it's adjacent to single family houses. And I think the 3-story was kind of pushing that neighborhood a little bit. And as I understand it, 4-story is now permitted in ZC. Is that correct?
It's correct. And it's there's a 45-foot height limit unless you border a residential zone. And this actually borders, that's a residential office zone, which is technically a mixed use zone. So the 60-foot allowance for height would be permitted on that property.
So I think we should have a discussion about height limits.
Sure.
Or numbers of stories, and in context to the adjacent properties.
Yeah, I would add, when this came up before us last time, I really was, as the earliest conversations I had on this property surrounded the idea of doing something unique in the community, making use of that site. In other words, really creating a design that allowed for some flexibility that we don't always have. I was envisioning a lot of different things, including cottage housing as an example. And I really didn't, and I also was sensitive to the neighbor concerns about locating a higher density multi-story apartment right adjacent to single family. So I wasn't strongly in support of the concept. I wasn't absolutely in support of affordable housing, but I felt like the site could give us more uniqueness if that's true. Now, I don't disagree with the idea that we need maximum units. Conversation we had, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, focused on maximizing units, period. The housing action plan provided a lot of data to support that. I've observed that we've now gone through 4 years of sustained declining central enrollments, and our student population is lower than it was then. And I don't know that our data today will provide the same, absolutely still need, but I don't know how much movement there's been in the market, or I see a lot of for rent signs in town, and the rates are probably still high, but I think we should, I'd like first to revisit that. And I know we've got updated data in our pipeline and things like that, but yeah, I don't disagree with the idea that this particular lot could give us something that could make a substantial improvement in our inventory of housing. For that, I think we do need some density. So I'm open to ideas.
So I'm hearing we're trying to find a balance between maximizing density and something that's cohesive and consistent with the rest of the neighborhood, or we'll blend well with it.
Yeah, or even, I mean, I know we've had a lot of conversations about Catherine Park, about the cottage housing concept, which was an example of what Mr. Perry was talking about. The council set out with a very clear idea of what we thought that parcel might accommodate in the form of low density, cottage housing or something similar. And it appears that we're moving in that direction, although the site has challenges. But that's just an example of, that proposed project could, in theory, be picked up and put over on the First and Pine property, in some different form. Not saying that's a good idea, but it's something that could be discussed.
I'm gonna make a bold statement right now, weird. I think that some of this is gonna take hard decisions. I think that you're gonna have to upset some neighbors. I think you're gonna have to upset the lady up. I think we're gonna have to upset some people to move forward with some of the projects that we wanna do. And I know it's unfortunate, but I think that there's a bigger demand, and I think that I've listened to her in our meetings chat endlessly about many, many, many people in our community that are struggling just to find a place to house themselves. And I think that if we are gonna take city property, we should maximize density on that property. And I think it's gonna upset a couple people, but I think that it's walkable, it's bikeable, it's centrally located, it's all of the things, right? That we need it to be. It's close to elementary schools, libraries, grocery stores. I mean, it's in that place. I think that taking a place that could have 57 units and deciding it could have 14 units is, I'm just gonna say, I don't support that. Like, I understand what you guys face in terms of people coming and being upset, and I think that that's part of what's gonna happen, but we have to also weigh the fact that we have a lot of citizens who are really upset because they can't afford to live here. I mean, yes, like, please.
So I think also like homelessness is pretty upsetting, and I would really like to try to tackle that. And what my dream would be is to see a long-term commitment to one-bedroom apartments for non-student adults, as many as possible, as dense as possible, because there's such a need for that in our community, and there are not enough units. And when these units come up for expiration in terms of affordability, that leaves people to be kicked out of their housing, and then again, they have to leave the community or they're homeless. And I see every single day that that is the biggest need. That is what people are lacking in this community. And when you pulled up your graph to show us the percentages of who is in need, there was that other, which is the highest in 22%. And that, I believe, is single adults that are mostly non-students. Some of them sure could be students. I don't know. We weren't sure if they were included in that. But that is the biggest need and the lowest accessibility. There are 5 places maybe that you can apply to get those housing options, and most of them are for people with disabilities or elderly only. So tons of people get excluded from that criteria, which is a real big challenge. I also would just love to see ADA accessibility if we're talking about terms. I would like to see that anyone can get into and use those units appropriately. Those are my main points.
So I would agree strongly with the last two sets of comments. And, I think that this is a situation where the need far exceeds what the community can kind of tolerate. And we have a lack of applicants for jobs. The labor market's tight. Well, the labor market's in part tight because the housing costs are high. Central Washington University have a hard time recruiting because the housing costs are so high, and they're
As with the cost of living.
yeah, so they're paying family wage jobs. These are family wage jobs, and people can't afford to live here. And so I'm of the opinion, again, we've made a commitment to, begin to look at options and provide, some sites for these housing units. And I would be strongly opposed to a proposal that significantly reduces the impact that we have on whatever is identified as the highest need. So I want the most long-term value in terms of affordable housing out of every project that we have any control over. And that's very broad, but I want maximum value, meaning it doesn't have to be the cheapest. It doesn't necessarily have to be 57 units. Maybe that's 55. But
Can we, I just want to get some decisions before our time runs out.
sure,
So can we agree that we are talking about an apartment complex and not individual houses or townhouses?
I agree.
I think at this point we are, yeah.
Can we agree that we're talking studio and one bedroom?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Can we agree that we need a certain amount of ADA units?
Yes.
Yes.
But I make the point about targeting non-student housing needs, because I'm not sure legally we can distinguish between a student and a non-student. So I get the point, but I'm saying that it may be a little too fine for us to say, sorry, you're student, not going to qualify, even if you're income eligible.
I forgot to look into it and that was what I was supposed to
I
do.
emailed today, no, and I actually emailed student housing today to try and get some answers to some of these things, because I wanted a specific answer as to why. If you are a student, you cannot apply, right?
So for our housing, the way it works, there are two grant funded from the, it's a home something trust, housing trust fund from the government.
Yep.
And those you cannot be a student for. So if the main person living in your unit or the only person living in your unit is a student, the funding will not cover that person's housing. So there are certain grants that can be funded to make those stipulations. I agree that I don't really know how all of that works, and it might depend on who then takes the project on, but there are contracts that can, and it's not to say students can't, but I think that the main thing is that we're having people in the community that are going to stay in the community, especially since we're looking for longevity and affordability.
So I contacted Central Student Housing and said, hey, can you explain that rule to me a little bit more? And then two, can you please list or give me a number of units or housing units that you have that you consider, right, affordable, and who do they serve? So like, is it families? Is it 2-3 bedroom apartments? And I haven't heard back from them on that, but I'm trying to gather that data for us as we're trying to have this discussion around the others, right?
And just for a point of clarity on that, the other section, the housing action plan doesn't specify what percentage, but it says that the bulk of the other is made up of college age students. So I don't know what that means. What that means,
Sure.
college age, means they're actually going to
It'd be
college.
nice to
It's a
know.
little ambiguous.
I didn't
It'd be
mean to
nice
interrupt.
to know what they have access to.
I'd like to end the
Yeah,
discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
Because I don't think we're going to solve it. First of all, what are you going to do with a couple? One of them goes to school and the other one doesn't. Well, and until you're ready to thaw down, I don't think we need to discuss it anymore.
I think if we're supplying studio and one bedroom apartments, you know, whoever's managing it can screen applicants how they want.
So let's summarize, when it comes to, basically, Nancy, what you were saying was, so we're looking for multifamily units, most likely a studio, one bedroom, maybe universal design that allows for that ADA component with every unit, or
I think a percentage of units.
What I recall from our discussion with the previous developer was that there was, with some guidance provided by council, there was an emphasis on providing a specific number of ADA units. I think all of which were located on the ground floor.
That's what he did.
And that allowed the multi-story building to be constructed at that level, which is okay if that's the limit of the ADA accessibility, but for any multi-story building that has all ADA acceptable units, that would require.
sure.
So I think we need to kind of keep, targets or something.
And there was a distinction between ADA and universal design.
Yes.
And if one of our targets are older people, well,
Aging in place, right?
aging in place, well, not in place, they're moving. So,
Well, we don't have to move out when she becomes small.
yeah,
But that,
but I don't,
So maybe what we're talking about here is in terms of, the guidance would be that we want to see a multifamily type of development. with preferences for at least at base, a certain amount of ADA units, but potentially, universal design might be, something that if it pencils out, that would make sense too. So I can put multifamily in the term section.
And I think this lends to our
Yeah.
process, right? Because if you come at me with a project that is a universal design project that has showers and no steps and all of these things, then that project gets preference over one that maybe does not. I mean, I think some of that stuff can be worked out in the process of choosing, right, a project, but I think us saying, no, like it would be, this is the gold, like, this is what we want. We understand that you might not be able to do it all cost wise, but like, if we can get universal design, if we can get, so that it can accommodate elderly, singles.
Yeah, I think it would make sense to put that in the target. And I am writing small here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to combine whatever we get here into a memo that I'll be distributing to everybody. So if you have people reading it, I apologize, but.
No, that's not a problem. I think to John's earlier, we may be setting ourselves up for an impossible task, right? We may be saying we want max density, but we also want full accessibility, which is, in order to make that happen, the cost will go up significantly. So I think the natural response was we can get some level of accessibility, but it's going to be fewer units, lower heights, and that's sort of, we've got to untangle max value. Yeah.
I will tell you that at 40 years, you're already a nonprofit, your price per square foot is already through the roof, so why not go for it? I'm just playing devil's advocate. Like, that's where I really feel like you are. I mean, to be honest, like, I think them trying to put this together, he didn't get it put together. It's hard to make it affordable and get it put together. I think if you're gonna have someone come in and do this project, it's gonna be a nonprofit. And at that point, they can layer their funding, they can get the elevator, they can get the things. I think I don't know that we are asking too much, and if that's where we're at.
So hang on, Nancy, because we'll have a comment.
A question really, it kind of gets off what you're talking about right now, but it goes back to the idea of the condominium studio and one bedroom. My question is there preference for more one bedrooms or more studios, or is it gonna be a 50-50 thing, or are we gonna what if they come in with a design that has, say it's a 50 unit kind of design, and 45 of the rooms or units are studios, and they only have 5 one-bedroom apartments?
I think that where we're at, we do not have these units. I don't think we can make a mistake. Because whatever we get with is going to fill up with the targets that we're trying to get.
Yes.
I think that we don't need to spend that much time on that until we get closer to having all we need.
Monica?
It feels like the ADA piece is pretty important for our community. Can we come to an agreement on a percentage of ADA units in the terms? 5%?
Yeah, I think he was kind of at, what did he have, 1 in each unit, so we had 3 and 57.
Do we know the need for ADA based on our housing action plan?
No, I don't think we have that kind of current data that would.
There's a need for it, as
Yeah.
far as numbers wise, I'm not sure what, right,
We'll fill them. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think the
but
housing.
that whole term that you're talking about is like what you were saying, that gets like. You're talking about, and I think that's why that project said, I'm willing to do 3, because those are very, like, that's a no lip shower, that's a very certain. That's a door, it's very specific doorway at every doorway, and it's very tailored to which way there's a lot of pieces and parts to that. Versus the more universal design, which is kind of a different thing. So I think that's why he went with 1 in the bottom floor of each unit, saying, yeah, I'll make it fully ADA, right? So if you want to do 5%, I mean, I think that's,
But if it was 50 units, that's
Yeah.
If you place it on preferences too, that could be something that you're reviewed as these proposals come forward. So whoever can maximize maybe ADA, that gives them some of the advantage in terms of.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think we will have a good process.
Well, I do think adding on to the ADA criteria, I think what's been said about target audience, really, elderly, all varieties of folks, different age ranges. I think the accessibility needs to be considered over and above ADA. A lot of folks will need full ADA accessibility, but I think that doesn't mean that will satisfy the overall demand.
Can we just say target 10% ADA and 20%, 30% universal design and proposals with that level will get bonus points.
The only thing I would say about that, Nancy, is that I think you start to, like, when you throw that out there, like, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm out. You know what I mean? Instead of like, these are the things that we're prioritizing, right? Like, without numbers maybe, right? Like, these are the priorities. This matches the housing action plan. Like we want high density, universal design. If you can squeeze ADA in there, like, you know what I mean? Then it gives somebody the creativity and flexibility to come in rather than feeling like defeated before they started. So I just want to be cognizant of that.
Because we can work with them, right, as that comes in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'd assume the universal design is, for lack of a better word, optional, or ADA is not. If it's if the city's involved in any way, I imagine we're bound by the requirements, right? And they'll be quantified in some way, some percentage, some number of units, whatever.
I have no idea.
That's a situation.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, assuming it's a nonprofit and they're learning the funding, they're gonna have their own requirements for the compliance, especially if it's housing trust fund money.
Right.
Or any of the folks in the letter. Or then you need to get into the specifics of it.
Oh, that's probably, maybe that's, I think, where we're headed.
Yeah.
Can't qualify without numbers, so why bother, right?
Well, there.
What else do we need to
So-
give you guidance on?
Sure, so my thing, another preference was, we want to maximize density, it sounds like. My chicken trap is horrible, I will read this later. So I really, what I'm looking at is, specifically the terms, I guess. What are the non-negotiables? Is there anything that we feel like we need to see out of any proposal to even consider? And that's sort of what this section is sort of designed for, to try to determine what are the non-starters.
And one thing I throw out, and I don't mean it as a non-starter, but one thing the council spent a lot of time debating, and I would say without resolution, is parking. How much is enough? How much is too much? How much is needed, period? Transit-oriented development. Do you need what we have? And I think the answer is it's probably going to be different than what we've had in the past.
We've already done it 3 times over, right in downtown. Right? I mean, we just did it. Got princess places all over the place,
Well,
right?
because,
I mean,
because parking is in code, that will be something that will have to be met. So I think that probably makes sense to have it under the term section. And to also, I would recommend, just based off of my view of the previous application, is that we require maybe a more detailed site evaluation, site plan that accounts for what those street improvements and the setbacks that will be associated with that. Because when we're talking about a half acre, you're taking 15 feet off one side, taking 10 feet off another. Well, that's reducing your footprint. That should be for parking, for development, for everything. All that should be considered in the proposal in order to know whether it's feasible. Because I think even with the last proposal we had, all the site plans that I saw with that didn't account for any of those elements. And if you don't account for those elements, it's questionable whether, you meet the parking requirements. So.
yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
The housing authority has a building that has, I don't know, 60 units in it, maybe, I can't say, and they don't require very much parking for it. I want to say there's like 25 spaces in their lot and maybe at most 10 cars parked on the street along it. So I think when we're talking affordable housing, a lot of those people are not going to have or need the use for a parking space, especially when you have a bus stop right there. Central transit being really accessible is going to be important. I can certainly talk with them to understand what their guidelines are on that, but typically with that type of affordable housing, that's not a huge need. And, when we're talking, just because you asked it earlier, studio, they, have studios open longer and more often than they do one bedroom. So I know there's a bigger desire for one bedrooms. Obviously, right, beggars can't be choosers, but I mean, we're people, we want our privacy, we want to be able to like post in a nice way and separate our spaces, especially when we're talking like work from home COVID, right? We all want a space for like rest, play, productivity. And so I have seen a big desire for the one bedrooms more than anything. That would be ideal, I would say, and preferences, more one bedrooms rather than studios, while also looking for a higher density and understanding more, you know, I wouldn't turn down use, so.
And one thing with the parking to keep in mind too is that, so our parking thresholds that are established in code, those have to be met unless there's some sort of departure option or something that not currently exists. And so
But it's
whatever those,
CC, right?
CC doesn't have its own parking requirements associated with it, but the development itself will have parking requirements for that property.
I want to get back to what John suggested and wondering if we can explore that option. If look for a plan that already has all of that fits the footprint and just see if we can find that. And at the same time, I mean, can we do dual paths or does that not make sense?
I think if nothing else, it's an example to somebody of what could be done on the site. I mean, maybe they don't have to do the exact same thing, but it sure gives them a great starting point. I see no harm, right, and finding some projects that would work.
Sure.
I'm assuming your departments work together. You
Always.
have somebody on staff that has a history with housing and with Habitat. And I think that they might have an idea where to look at.
I think I was just gonna say, I think it would be helpful when we kind of have this conversation in other contexts, but I think given that we're talking about a specific parcel, it would be, I think, very helpful for it to be sort of the first level of planning to be established based on the setbacks. So the parcel is this big to start with, but once the setbacks are factored in, it gets this big. And then the developer knows exactly what portion of it, that we could make some assumptions on parking and setbacks and all that. But that might speed the process along a little bit, because I think if they zero in on the buildable footprint more quickly, I think then we'll know what we're able to get out of it.
I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah,
I can make a comparison.
if you do the site plan, rough site
Sure.
plan.
It just basically shows the constraints. The good news is the property doesn't have any critical areas or anything like that on it, so that's a plus. It's not in the 100-year floodplain, so there are less constraints than a lot of properties in the city. But it is a half acre, and like I said, you're losing some of that acreage to landscape requirements.
I know it's a minor point in the overall scheme of things in some sense, but a lot of the conversation we had a few years back was how livable will the project be when it's done? And without regard to whether it's a studio or a multi-unit apartment, we want people that live there to enjoy living there. And the absence of green space or some development within the site is problematic, but I don't know that it can be pre-designed, so to speak. It might be emphasized or encouraged, but I think that's something to keep in mind.
Well, it's just stuff like, items like livability, I think could be a preferential element that we could apply.
That's subjective,
Okay, so there were a few other items, and we are getting short on time here. Let's see here. So is there a preference for projects that may be able to extend beyond that minimum commitment for affordable housing and timelines? I mean, I would assume maybe we want a preference that allows for that,
I
so.
think it is, but I think as Sarah said, it will, especially that requirement will ensure that only nonprofits can participate.
Sure.
I think.
And that's why maybe it makes sense as a preference if we only get applications from or from organizations or developers that are not nonprofit, maybe that, that's something that
I think the question is, what are we willing, what can we give up in exchange for that additional obligation? Is there something that sweetens the pot and for the developer?
I think. Would the density piece address the, 60-foot height limit? for you?
Well, I think it presumes that it's going to be as high as possible.
Yeah.
Convincing argument.
I know it's not pleasant, but I think it's just I don't know what to say. I mean,
I think it's reasonable. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
I know it's not.
So in reference to the requirements, there are things we're gonna need to see. So we have multifamily and parking. Is there anything else before we move on to this next little piece? I mean, we have time, Mo, and maybe we don't have time to go on to the next piece. That we would definitely want to see with any of these proposals that we haven't covered. I mean, right now, just for the multifamily and parking, the rest is basically preferences, which is, it's fine. I think you're walking this line where you want to leave it wide enough open to where you get proposals, but condense it enough to where you get a result, somewhat consistent with what you want to see.
One thing I'd point out, that it probably wouldn't, we don't need to go into detail on it, but it's a reality, and that is the time of completion, the obligation of the developer to complete the project or initiate the project. The reality is that most of these projects are, as has been said, are put together through a patchwork of funding, and grants haven't even been applied for, and some won't be successful. So we've got to be, I think the value of having a timeline was why we're back where we are now, because we could have been going on for many more years and no action. But at the same time, it has to be realistic. So I think we need to look for that balance again.
Okay. So maybe,
a reasonable performance period of some kind. I don't know how you define it.
You're at 2 years on this.
okay, I'm wondering how we define that.
I mean, you're.
So maybe we have, something specific, like if they provide an estimated timeline with sort of the financials
Yeah, I was
associated
gonna
with
say,
it.
you have to come up with some kind of benchmark. I mean, if you're dealing with federal and state funds, I mean, a 2-year window is not, bad. But I think that there's gotta be some benchmarks of like, okay, if this is how you said you were gonna layer your funding, then you gotta be able to show me that you have an acceptance letter to housing trust funds, right? Like with my projects, I can show you that. I can say, listen, I have a letter, I have the land, I have this grant, I've been awarded this grant, I have, like, you know what I mean? There's gotta be some kind of benchmark in there to say, yes, I'm moving forward, I'm walking through this process, right? I've applied for permitting, I've gone through, you know what I mean, the application process, like there's a lot of things to this, right? That you could demonstrate and show,
Sure.
right?
So we already built all that into the
Yeah.
initial award letter and then the agreement.
Yeah.
We provide those benchmarks and they're actually timetables that have to be met. They're, awarded property is transferred. So, that's all usually negotiated as part of the application process.
Yeah, and I think that was probably one of the reasons why this last one was able to be stopped it, because those benchmarks weren't met, so we can identify and monitor that progress.
I think it might be helpful to outline the expectations as part of the solicitation process. And again, that negotiation will fine tune that. But I recall that the Habitat project on Bender, we had a very aggressive time requirement for implementation. And it was a struggle, but without that, I think we wouldn't be where we are today. So I think it's important.
Well, we're about 9 till, so this gives us a good starting point. I will send out basically just a summary of what we've come up with here, as well as some of these side notes that I have here in terms of coming up with ways to outline expectations and potentially looking for pre-designed options or projects that have been created on similar sized pieces of property, and see how that might translate. So thanks everybody for being a part of this. It just gives us at least a starting point, and you can expect an email from me with this information.
If we wait a year to do this again, it's not a city priority.
We are trying to move forward on this.
And I'm really hoping that this new staff person, right? Right?
Yes.
This is a thing, to have a dedicated staff person that can spend time, right? Outside of 9 million other things that they have to do to try and push this, move this, market this, advertise this, right? Push the agenda, put this whole thing out to the community continually on a continuing basis. So I have like really great hopes that that's gonna be really helpful in trying to move these projects down these timelines in a manner that's been better than what we've got. hard. A lot of people in this fight for a long time.
So I would just add that we did hire our housing and grants coordinator and he starts next week.
Yeah.
Oh, pretty excited.
So do we get a Catherine Park update next month or soon?
I'm sorry.
I can, if you have about 2 minutes, while we have everyone in the room, I know we do need to take down the tables prior to the 7 o'clock meeting, so I can be very brief. So, we wanted to make sure that this timeline didn't pass either. So there have been a number of actions on the Catherine Park, project and wanted to give you an opportunity to let you know what's going on. Since council sent the project back, there are a number of questions at the March 20th meeting about the buildability and some of the site design aspects, the accessibility of the site. So we met, since that time with Habitat. They had the proposal on the property for the 10 cottage units. The big question that came up was the wetland or potential wetland on the site. And so they invested in an initial study, which is actually part of the packet tonight, that said that they believed it was an irrigation-induced wetland. But in order to define whether or not it was, we needed to do some work. Since we are the official property owners, the city has surplus the property but has not released it. We really are the responsible party to do that work. The work is probably going to be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 to do the work it made to pipe the irrigation or contain the ditch, line the ditch, and then monitor for 1 to 2 seasons to ensure that it's not a wetland, because it will determine the amount of buildable property on that specific project. So our proposal will actually go back through the Affordable Housing Commission to actually spend some of the affordable housing sales tax dollars on that project. That would make a recommendation to council for approval and moving forward with that project within the city responsibility. So that's our brief, and we will notify the property, the adjacent property owners, and just in case they didn't hit the packet, just to make sure folks know where this is at. We've had a lot of questions about it, and it's great to have everybody in the room so you can get the latest and greatest.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I just thank everyone.
Great.
Thanks for having us.